Hi, I'm Laura Allison, the Career Specialist from Anclote High School. We're going to take the opportunity today to go over the overview of the Florida Bright Futures Scholarship Program. We'll use this as a chance to get some general information and have an understanding on the application process and what the expectation would be for a student who is planning to apply for or use the scholarship for their post-secondary options. Our session agenda will include some Bright Futures general information. It will outline what students will need to have in order to be eligible for certain awards, as well as the different award types that students could apply for, and some information on the evaluation timeline and the award notification. Just the general background needed so that a student would have an idea if this is something that would fit their post-secondary options. We'll also look at a little how-to quick on the home screen, how to navigate it, as well as a little bit of an overview of where to go to complete the two-step application process for Florida financial aid. The first thing we'll look at is the Bright Futures initial eligibility requirements. The most basic general requirements for any high school senior looking at Florida Bright Futures as a scholarship opportunity, they'll need to know that they need to be a Florida State resident, or a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen as determined by the post-secondary institution. So they'll definitely want to make contact with the school that they're planning to go to. They also will need to complete the Florida financial application for aid no later than August 31st after high school graduation. Most of them will find that in their high schools they're definitely being encouraged to do that more mid-year time frame. If they haven't already, it'd be a great opportunity to get started on that. But otherwise, it definitely has to be completed no later than August 31st after high school graduation. They also have to earn a standard Florida high school diploma or its equivalent from a Florida public high school or registered private high school. The secondary part to the general requirements is that they have not been found guilty of any type of felony charge. They also have to be accepted and enroll in a degree or certificate program at an eligible Florida public or independent post-secondary institution, and they need to start that within 2 years of high school graduation. They also will need to enroll in at least 6 non-remedial semester hours, so basically part-time and classes that are bearing credit. And you'd want to see each institution to understand which classes those were. A general kind of side note to that on the being accepted and enrolling in a school. It is important for students to consider Florida Bright Futures, even if they're planning maybe to go into the military for military service, or even if they're looking at something that's maybe going to delay them entering school for up to 2 years. But it's important for them to go ahead to apply to have that option available to them if need be. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at just the general requirements, we'll see that pretty much Florida Bright Futures scholarships are open to almost all high school graduates from the general requirements perspective. What we're going to see now is that based on some more specific criteria, students can receive funding for one of these award levels. And there are 4 basic award levels that Florida looks at. There's the Florida Academic Scholars, the Florida Medallion Scholars, the Florida Gold Seal CAPE Scholars, and the Florida Gold Seal Vocational Scholars. So we'll take an opportunity today to kind of look at some general vocabulary that's incorporated into the criteria for each of those programs, as well as some overarching themes and things that they would need for each individual award level. The first thing to look at is there are many items that are used to kind of determine eligibility for the different award levels we saw on the previous slide. Things like grade point average, college entrance exams like ACT, SAT, PERT exam, community service hours, industry certifications, and even specific high school programs and coursework. So what we're going to do is look at what those things mean in a specific way, especially from the Florida financial aid lens. Okay, the first thing we'll look at is the grade point average, or better known as the GPA. Basically, Florida evaluates for Bright Futures using an unrounded weighted high school grade point average. It's calculated to 2 decimal places in the 16 college preparatory credits. So basically meaning they're evaluating just the core classes, the English, math, science, and social studies courses. So the GPA for this calculation looks different than that's on the report card. Also, you need to acknowledge that the weighting looks maybe slightly different. So the following courses are weighted at 0.25 if they're a semester course and 0.5 if they're a full year course. So things like AP, all IB coursework, all ACE coursework, dual enrollment, or honors have a different type of weighting. The reason why we take this time to look at the grade point average or the GPA is just to acknowledge that the GPA calculation that's being used by the state of Florida will vary next to what is reported on a student's report card or on their transcript. And this is just because of the way that they use their calculations, as well as the fact that they only pull those 16 courses into the calculation. And this is all outlined in the Florida statutes on what's reportable on the report card versus what's reportable to the state for the scholarship application piece. So we just want to make sure that everyone understands that the GPA will slightly vary in comparison to what a student may see on their transcripts or their report card. The next component that's used to help with the award levels determination is college entrance exam. The two main types of exams that are used for this are the ACT and the SAT. Students have to meet the score requirement set in the statute for each award that they're looking at. They have until the end of July, so July 31st of their high school graduation year, to receive that score or to get that score up or where they need that score to fall. And that's when the cutoff is where they're set for the evaluation purposes. The best way for a student to make sure that that proper calculation goes in and is received quickly by the state is for them to ensure that their demographics are correct on their test registration. So when they do that kind of pre-gridding or bubbling or sign up for their test, that they have the right information and it's linked to their high school. Or one of the best ways is to make sure they request all official test scores be sent to at least one of Florida State universities when registering. They can be anywhere from a large school or to their local community college, but it's very important that these scores be sent so that they can be evaluated by the state. Another factor for pretty much all of the award levels that needs to be taken into consideration is service hours or community service hours. Essentially, students are asked to complete varying levels of hours depending on the award that they're trying to receive. They have to complete these service hours during high school, and they have to be completed by high school graduation. So essentially, they have from the time that they're determined to be a 9th grade student up until the day of graduation to complete that number of hours. Each district school board and school will have a list of activities and a process for documentation of service hours. Here in Pasco County, students are recommended to reach out to their school counselors or their career specialists to find out about the documentation they need to fill out and look at some approved activities. And all total hours have to be reflected on the transcripts. So it is very important that students understand that they meet with someone, discuss what they plan to do for their community service hours, get the right paperwork so those hours can be documented properly, and then get that paperwork submitted back to their offices of either their career specialist or their school counselor in order to get those hours put on their transcripts. It is critically important that that documentation be followed to the appropriate measure for their campus. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at some of the general broad terms that are going to be looked at in all of the award levels, we're going to take a brief look at the two first award levels that were listed and probably the two most common that students hear about or talk about, or colleges or universities ask students about their qualifications for, and that's the Florida Academic Scholars and the Florida Medallion Scholars. This chart is actually taken directly from the Bright Futures Handbook, but it gives students an idea of what the expectation is in order for them to receive the different scholarships. There are basically two levels. You can see one requires a little bit more on the weighted GPA, Bright Futures GPA, as well as the entrance exams and the community service hours. If you see clearly, it lists the 16 high school course credits. Remember, we talked about the 16 credits earlier that are used for GPA calculation. It lists them here as 4 Englishes, 4 math courses, 3 natural science courses, 3 social science, and 2 world language. Like I said earlier, it's core coursework that Florida is going to use to calculate that GPA, and they need to have either 3.0 or 3.5 to qualify for each. It also outlines the college entrance exams on the SAT or the ACT on the chart. These are composite scores, or the main calculated score. So if you see the 29 is for the ACT, the 1330 there listed in the top box is for the SAT. The bottom box is the 25 composite for the ACT, and the 1210 is for the SAT. So these can be super scored, and it's important that students kind of get a better idea of what that means, but it's basically they can take the tests more than once and have their best scores forward to make that calculation. So these are the general composites that they need to be working for or towards to receive the scholarships. The last column is the community service hours. So students will need to have documented either 75 hours or 100 hours, depending on which level of scholarship they're trying to apply for. In general, our recommendation is all students work towards the 100 hours because it's critically important if a student's thinking that they are looking forward to any type of post-secondary opportunity that they are putting back and giving time into their community. And this would definitely be the one thing that you wouldn't want a student to not have met at the end of their graduation time. If they've worked so hard academically, it's just important that they use this opportunity to pace themselves. So maybe targeting 20 to 25 hours a year through some sort of a volunteering or community service event. And like I said, that all varies on your campus. So make sure that students reach out and have that conversation and dialogue with their school counselor or their career specialist. This chart just outlines some other ways to qualify. So basically, students who've demonstrated high academic merit through other recognition programs may be eligible for Bright Futures without having to meet one of the criteria requirements. So if you look here, a sample example of that would be maybe a student who's earning either their ACE or their IB diploma wouldn't have to meet the college entrance exam requirement, but they would just have to have the service hours in order to qualify for their specific award level. There's some other things listed here as well, the National Hispanic Scholars, as well as the National Merit Finalists and Scholars. So this is a chart to take a look at if those are things that you are enrolled in or working towards within your school to get a general idea. This, again, can all be found on the Florida Bright Futures website, and we'll talk about that a little later on how to access that. But just to give you an idea of other ways that students can qualify for the Florida Academic Scholars and the Florida Medallion Scholars programs. So next, we're going to take a look at some of the opportunities that students have to earn Bright Futures awards through the state based upon some of their vocational and industry certification requirements. The first is the Gold Seal CAPE Scholars Award. And basically, this is lining it that there are two major ways that students have the initial eligibility to receive this scholarship, and that's that they earn a minimum of 5 post-secondary credit hours through CAPE industry certifications, which articulate for college credit. This is important for students who are enrolled in CTE programs on their campuses or are potentially taking some dual enrollment courses that offer industry certifications to be looking at and to meet with their career specialist or the head of their CTE program that they're in to understand which of these certifications equate to this. They should also have a progression chart that they can look at on each campus for their CTE program. That will help them understand if this is something that they're currently enrolled in or if this is something that's an opportunity available for them on their high school campus. Also, they would need to complete 30 community service hours. Again, this all kind of connects back to industry certification. An example of an industry certification would be if a student receives their Microsoft Office Specialist Certificate, meaning that they had taken a class either through their campus or in college where they earned that industry certification. Those certifications can be translated for college credit. So this scholarship just requires that students meet certain eligibility through receiving credit for passing those industry certification tests. One of the great things about the vocational scholarships available through Florida Bright Futures, including the Gold Seal CAPE Scholars, is that they can be funded for students who are in any kind of career education program or certificate program. This would be anything from like Marchman Technical College to Pasco Hernando or SPC, and some of those schools that have the 2-year entry to the workforce programs. But in this case with the Gold Seal CAPE Scholars, it's not just limiting to that. It's just saying that a student can use this with an associate in science degree, and then they could also articulate it into a Bachelor of Science degree with some different requirements along the way and meeting certain standards. So it's important, if this is a scholarship that you are awarded, you're looking at, you understand the things that you need to do to maintain eligibility and to transfer that into different levels of programming, so maybe from your associates to your bachelor's. So again, when we talk about that Bright Futures Handbook a little later, make sure that you earmark that and put that on your web browser so you can go back and look at those requirements as you're working through your degree program. This next award level opportunity is called the Gold Seal Vocational Scholars, or the GSV Award. This is basically based upon a student completing 3 years of a career and technical education program, or as you've heard me say, a CTE program on their campus. They basically have to have 3 full credits in a single program, so it has to be all aligned and sequential. They also have to achieve a required weighted minimum GPA of a 3.0 in their non-elective high school courses, so kind of going back to that core coursework. Not the same 16 credits, but just core courses. They also have to achieve the required minimum 3.5 unweighted GPA in their career education courses. So in those CTE courses, they need a 3.5 unweighted GPA. We'll look in a moment at a chart that'll talk about the required minimum scores on the ACT, SAT, or the Florida PERT, Post-Secondary Education Readiness Test exams, and they also have to complete 30 community service hours. This is a great opportunity for a student who is involved in the CTE program on their campus and who's really enjoying the opportunity available in that career and technical education. This chart outlines the current minimum score requirements for the Gold Seal Vocational Scholars Awards. If you look, there's a breakdown for the ACT, for reading, English, and math, for SAT, critical reading and math. So these are more of like the subtest aligned scores rather than the composites that were listed earlier. And then there's different dates for SAT prior to March 1st of 2016, and then after, and then PERT. This scholarship is the only one that you can receive through PERT testing. So this is pretty nice because this is offered frequently at community colleges and something that's very easily accessible to students to have the opportunity to go in and test on. So if you look, there's a reading, writing, and a mathematics score for that, which definitely differentiates it from the other award levels. The Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship can only be used at post-secondary institutions that offer specific programs. So like an applied technology degree, a technical education program, so that's like an associate applied science or associate of science, or a career education certificate program. Some great local institutions that accept this scholarship and have many students going there that use that would be Marchman Technical, as well as Pasco Hernando State College. If you're looking at other institutions, just make sure that you reach out to them to see how this can be translated or equated to their campus, or if this is something that they are able to honor. Okay, now that we've had the opportunity to look at some of those award levels and kind of the general program requirements and information related to Bright Futures, we're going to look at how the evaluation process works and how students are awarded and notified of their awards. The first thing to understand is there are 2 general evaluation periods for the Florida Bright Futures Awards. The first is considered the early evaluation, and the second is the final evaluation, and we'll look more specifically at those in just a moment. And it's also important to understand that your transcripts will be submitted within 30 days of the end of each semester by the school or district. So meaning our school district sends out the transcripts for the students who have applied for the scholarships kind of digitally, electronically, so that you can be evaluated 30 days at the end of each semester beginning your senior year, so that you have the opportunity to receive the scholarships that you might be eligible for. Okay, so the first thing is the early evaluation period. This is the first opportunity that high school seniors have to be evaluated for the Florida Bright Futures Scholarship awards. This comes right after the end of the 7th semester, so basically after the first half of the student year. It basically is evaluative on their current coursework, as well as the required coursework they have until that point, their GPA, any community service hours that were already earned through January 31st, as well as test scores that have posted for January 31st. So students can be awarded their scholarships as quickly as basically early into that calendar year, or basically halfway through their senior year. But there's also another opportunity through that final evaluation period. Okay, the final evaluation is the last opportunity a student has to be evaluated for that after graduation. And it comes after the graduation point, or a student has earned their standard diploma. And it takes into consideration every test that's been taken through July 31st. It also takes into consideration that any service hours that were completed through that point, as well as their coursework and the GPA that they need in order to receive the scholarship. So the question that many people have is, how do we get evaluated for this, or how do we find out if we're eligible? And we're going to look at the way that students need to apply for this opportunity through Bright Futures, as well as where they will go to receive their eligibility information. The key thing to know is that students will be notified their eligibility through their kind of portal, their student account there. They'll post an official award eligibility or an ineligibility there after those 2 evaluation periods, so students know if they've received which award level and where they are in the process. Students should check that account as frequently as possible, and we'll talk about the importance of that in a little bit when we look at that how-to section. And students who are awarded an IB or ACE diploma will receive notification of their eligibility in early fall. So typically seniors will kind of know that before they go, as they're going into their senior year. So they will generally know as soon as they receive their diploma their eligibility for their Florida Bright Futures. So I think the biggest question that most people have is, okay, I've been awarded a specific level within Florida Bright Futures. How much does that pay for? And that really varies on which award level you receive. This information here basically covers the Florida Academic Scholar and the Florida Medallion Scholar. So basically it gives a general breakdown related to tuition. So saying the Florida Academic Scholar will receive an award to cover 100% of tuition and applicable fees, and $300 for both fall and spring semesters for additional expenses. The Florida Medallion will do 75% of tuition and applicable fees. Now, keep in mind that's just covering the tuition. That does not cover things like room and board and meal plans for students who go away. So it's important for students to understand there are other expenses to college than just tuition. It's also important for students to understand that this is talking about a general Florida State University, so a school within the state university system. If a student is looking at like a non-public institution, they can receive a private award. And if they go to that Bright Future Student Handbook, there is a formula there that explains how that is paid out, because it's a little differently than if they're in a state university system college. But it is really important for students to know that there are other expenses for school besides just tuition, and it talks about applicable fees. And so it's important for them to understand what all of the direct and implied costs for school are when they understand how much this covers for the institution that they're choosing to go to. This chart gives an overview of the 2020-2021 Bright Future Scholarship per hour award amounts for the Gold Seal Vocational Scholars and Gold Seal CAPE Scholars. And this has to do with the type of program that they're in. If you see, it's broke down and it's based on a credit hour or clock hour award. It is really, again, important that students reach out to the the institutions that they're choosing to go to and ask them how Bright Futures equates and with the different awards they have on their program. The financial aid offices at the schools and the universities that they're looking at going to or applying to will have a great breakdown and explain to them how much it covers towards their particular program. Again, I cannot express the importance of students understanding how to locate, where to go to get that Florida Student Financial Aid information in that Bright Futures Handbook. Chapter 2 gives a great breakdown of the money and the awards, so students are well armed with the information they need. as they are transitioning into post-secondary education. Okay, now that we've discussed kind of award amounts and given kind of a general overview of, again, how that's evaluated and how students find out if they're eligible, we're going to take a look at the Bright Futures home screen and kind of see where students need to be familiar with, and even parents, so you can kind of understand where you would go to get more information. This presentation today is meant just to be kind of a general overview and point you in the right direction. So this is an opportunity for you to kind of get an idea of where to go to tap into those digital resources and a little bit more how to. Okay, if you go to the Florida Financial Aid website, this is what the general screen looks like when you come to it, and it's basically Florida Student Scholarship and Grant Programs. If you look on the right side, it lists a lot of information about different programs and assistant opportunities in Florida, and we'll talk a little bit about those more specifically in a moment, but it also lists for students eligible institutions. It lists how they need to work through the first-time application process. You'll see the two boxes that are highlighted there, the login and the Bright Futures Scholarship, since today we're really talking about Bright Futures eligibility, and then showing where students will go to log in to get their information and their eligibility and track their application process. These are two of the kind of important critical parts to our presentation today. If students click on the previous page where it said Florida Bright Future Scholarship, it will take them to this page. This page is critically important for students to go through, to walk through, and understand. I think I've talked about the Bright Future Student Handbook multiple times in this presentation because it is so important for students to be familiar with where to go to access this information. This breaks down each of the chapters. They are can be downloaded as PDFs, or you can just easily web search them and pull them up at any time. Each chapter has different information, from initial eligibility to specific scholarship information, and that renewal piece, how we talked about how students renew their eligibility as they're in school, and then other additional resources. Keep in mind that all of these programs are funded through Florida state lottery monies, so it is important for students to continuously kind of take a look at and get understanding for how that program is funded and how it equates to their 2 or 4 years of their education. So this is the best way and source to find that information. I would definitely recommend bookmarking it on your web browser, going through maybe downloading the PDFs or printing them or keeping them in a file, just so you have quick, easy access to the information as you're navigating the senior year, as well as navigating your college funding experience each year. The next piece we're going to talk about is the Florida Financial Aid application, the FFAA, not to be confused with the FAFSA, which is the Federal Application for Student Aid. Two different things. One lets students apply for federal funding, which all colleges require that students fill that out. That's the FAFSA, whereas this is the Florida Financial Aid application, and this is just for students who are in the state of Florida. All seniors should fill out both applications, but I'm going to kind of walk through a general overview of the Florida Financial Aid application today. Okay, so the Florida Financial Aid application will open generally from October 1st to August 31st for that particular senior cohort of that school year. The Florida Financial Aid application must be completed for students to apply for Florida Bright Futures. Okay, this has to be done by August 31st. This is one of the requirements in order to be eligible, is to have this application completed, because that's how students are screened and awarded. There is also other different types of challenge grants and scholarships that are awarded to students who have specific demographic or specific criteria that they could use to receive other funding, and that has to be done by April 1st. So this application is used for a multitude of programs, but for today's purposes, we're really going to highlight that the August 31st date must be completed for students for the Bright Futures eligibility. The application process is 2 steps. So students will need to create a student account, and then they will need to actually complete that FFA, that Florida Financial Aid application. The account is what gives students access, and then the application is about answering specific questions about their high school education history. Okay, the first step is to create the student account. Remember earlier when I showed you the screenshot of the Florida Financial Aid page, we talked about where to get the Bright Futures Handbook. You'll go back to the same spot in that top corner, Login. You'll click there, and you can click Create a Student Account, or you can click there where it says First Time Applicants and create a student account. All students need to create an account before they can complete the application. It is very important that when students complete this account that they keep track of their login information. The reason why it's important is if students try to go in and create multiple profiles or applications, this will pop up where there are twin profiles, and this can create a lot of issues for students when they're trying to be awarded eligibility. So if a student goes in and they attempt to do this and it comes up and says a profile already exists and gives this warning button, it's really important that you follow the instructions on there and go through the process, because there can be problems with getting eligibility. Anytime it comes up, if there's an issue with like a social security number or a duplicate profile, things have to be cleared up right away for students to be awarded their eligibility. You can only have one profile set up on the Florida Financial Aid system. Once a student creates their profile, this screen will pop up and it will give them their user ID and their password. You see the red bubble there. It is so important that students write down their login credentials. They write down that user ID and the password. They put it in their notes on their cell phone. They write it in a safe place, but they keep track of it. I would definitely recommend sharing that information also with a parent or guardian, just so that students have that information so they can go back and check and look at the eligibility and the award notifications on their Florida Financial Aid application once they've completed it. This is the login that they'll go to look at that. Okay, now that the profile is created, they'll move on to step 2. On that same screen, if you see at the top there, it says, please click here to submit your Florida Financial Aid application. So once they write down their user ID and their password, if they click there, it will walk them through that application process. And they'll go in and they'll be able to click on Florida Financial Aid application, and they'll also click on that top student section. You see the red bubbles there in the bottom right screen. That's on there. That's how they'll start that process. And we'll kind of walk through some of that information, not every step, but get a general idea of what that looks like here in the next couple slides. One of the first pieces of information is that students will need to fill out their demographic information. If they look at the top where the red is, the blue highlighted area is what they're working on. They'll have to work through all of those separate pieces there in order to complete and acknowledge their application. But the demographic information is just their general information. So like this year for the students, they would put June 2nd of 2001 as their high school graduation date. They would also go through and list their contact information. It's important to have this information up to date and accurate because, again, this is how we're awarded and we receive notification of what our eligibility looks like. This continues on beyond the contact information. It goes on to more specific questions about other demographics. This is important that students fill out because this, if you select yes to some of these, it can lead you to other scholarships and grants that are offered specifically from the state, having to do with different groups that maybe you identify with or that you're affiliated with. So students need to make sure that they talk to maybe a parent or guardian prior to filling this out so they understand if any of this criteria would meet their family or their particular situation. The next piece is the academic background. So this is where students will go in and enter in the information about high school, where they're going, their experience there. If you see there are different check boxes in where they're planning to go to school, and they'll just need to take their time and work through each of these boxes and then submit that information as well. The next screen that comes up will be for students who would be able to apply for the scholarship for children and spouses of deceased or disabled veterans. This is something that a student would want to speak to their family members about, again, going back to some of that identifying information from earlier. And if they don't, if this doesn't pertain to them, then they would need to go through the boxes accordingly and check how that would be. Making sure that with each next that they click, that anything that's identified in like red that needs to be highlighted is taken care of. This again is just for a specific group of students. So not all the students will need to or be eligible for this, but this is something that will come up on everyone's application. This also, the Jose Marte Scholarship Challenge Grant. This is another, again, specific criteria that is for targeting a certain group of students. So students just need to go through all of these boxes and fill them out accordingly, and to move on to the next section. This also is the Rosewood Family Scholarship. This has to do with a specific group of people who live in Florida who were affected by the Rosewood incident during the 1920s. Students should definitely reach out to family members to find out if this is something that they're affected by, but this is not going to be for every student. So a student will be able just to go through, check the no box, and move forward if this does not apply to them. And this also is the last one that's for specific criteria, is where you're required to enter in specific information in order to receive the Florida Farm Worker Student Scholarship. Again, this is not for all students, it's just for students who are within a certain targeted population. So students will just be able to toggle through this if this is not something that applies to them. And then we come to the last page, and this is where you submit and acknowledge. Again, if you see the blue box at the top is highlighted around that, you have to make sure that you submit that application. So that's why we tell students just to toggle through each page, click the criteria that applies to them, clicking next to work their way through until they get to this last page. By clicking that submit button at the bottom, you're basically sending it through. You only need to click it one time. And this is what we'll go through based on your login credentials for you to be screened for eligibility. This can be completed. Again, they open up on October 1st, so students can complete this even if they know they haven't met all the eligibility requirements, just to have everything on file for those 2 evaluation periods. It's important that students make sure they click the submit button. In order to know that you've actually successfully submitted, you'll see this little box that says success, and so it's a great opportunity at that moment to celebrate that you're one step further on your way in receiving some scholarship potential, as well as being in that process to make plans for your post-secondary opportunities. Once the application is submitted, the results will generate here, and this is where students will be able to see their program eligibility. This is also where if they needed to update, for some reason, their Florida financial aid application, they could go in here and there would be an update button, updating the student application. This is also where they'll see like maybe why they would be ineligible for a specific program or what programs they've received awards for. Students should periodically check into that results page just to track their information as they're kind of working through their senior year, and once they submit that application and that initial evaluation, early evaluation period has taken place. This is just a great screen to kind of walk through the general overview of state programs' initial eligibility for high school students in their senior year. It goes month by month by telling them like kind of what the deadlines look like, but basically showing that Bright Futures receives early evaluation transcripts for seniors in February. In March, that's when you'll be able to see that first results posted. And then you would be able to check the status of your award online. It walks through when you need to apply for those specific, maybe targeted populations or demographic group applications and for the grants and scholarships. It is a great visual. I recommend that students screenshot this, parents screenshot this as you're working through the senior year, just to know what to check in with every month when it comes to Bright Futures. And it's a great opportunity for you to see if you're not a senior, or if you are a senior, it's still not too late to apply. It's something for every student, just to have an idea of what that Florida process looks like. This is perhaps one of the most important pages of the presentation today, and that it gives you information and places to go to receive help with that Florida financial aid application. Everything you see on the right is going to be direct help for that application. So maybe if you're having technical difficulties, maybe if you have a twin profile, that is your point of contacts of ways to reach out to people who work in customer service there to get your questions answered. Because that's all ran by an agency through the state. That's not something that we run here within the county or our local schools. So if you're having technical issues, that's who you need to reach out to. If you need support on your campus, see your career specialist and school counselor. They're the ones that can answer questions maybe about how your GPA has been calculated, or they can answer questions about what courses you've taken or courses that you would need to take, and kind of help you with more of that general information and eligibility. But when it comes to the technical aspect of the student profile and the application, it's important that students contact those state level offices to receive that assistance. So this is a great slide, again, maybe to take a picture of, to kind of hold on to for later when you're working through that process if you have questions. But using your campus support just to understand what the Bright Futures looks like and how it equates to your particular campus and situation. Because your career specialist and school counselor have a better idea of what opportunities are accessible on your campuses to help guide you in that conversation, whereas the state is going to be more helpful in how to fill out that application or any technical issues you might be having to work through that process. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for sticking through my presentation here and getting a good idea of that general overview process for Florida Bright Futures and financial aid. But I want to do a special thank you to Ann Donnellan. She's the career specialist at Gulf High School. She has been so gracious to let me use her actual Bright Futures presentation and adding kind of the audio piece to it and fine-tuning it tonight for our college and career fair event. She has also got all of her information from the FLDOE website, so that is the primary source for all of this. So feel free to look any of this up there. This is just kind of a compilation of the highlights and the big points. Again, making sure that you're going back to that handbook for any questions that you might have more intensely. But I just want to thank you for your time and the opportunity to maybe help you think about ways that you're going to fund your post-secondary opportunities here within Pasco County.